Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Aliens and UFOs video. Alright, another entry here based on one of your suggestions. This time yet another newer suggestion. This is like a record. Usually I'm going through the older ones by this point because I'm trying to see if anything was missed. But once I saw this other new suggestion, I knew I just had to talk about it. This one has to do with yet another UFO abduction involving yet another case of multiple parties. So multiple people all being abducted at the same time. And the fact that there are multiple parties, all of them giving the same claim, the same information thereafter, makes it seem like it's much more credible than, let's say, if it was just one individual person. But yes, lots of interesting information to share. It has the classic hallmarks of your average UFO alien abduction. Kind of weird saying that in today's day and age there's, I guess, not so many, but a good abundance of alien abductions that there's more along the lines of classic traits for them now. But yes, it has to do with this. It is known as the Allagash Abduction, and you're looking at a picture of the four men that were involved within that abduction. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all that information associated with this particular incident. So what was this Allagash abduction? Well, it occurred just a little whiles back. That would be about August 1976 to be specific. So not too far back, at least enough to be still considered within modern times. There were these brothers, twin brothers, by the names of Jim and Jack Weiner, and then there was a friend of his named Charles Fultz. They all decided that they wanted to go ahead and go camping. Interestingly enough, apparently either one of them or all of them are artists as well, because they had met while studying at the Massachusetts College of Art, and so it's going to be interesting later on to showcase, because you'll get to see some of their actual artwork here depicting what they described happened to them. But there they were, about to take a trip, in this case through the mountains of Maine, specifically at a place called Allagash. You're looking at a closer picture of it here. This is a location where if you get to a certain area, particularly towards the lakes, then you can truly be out there in the wilderness. So much so, in fact, that they decided they wanted to get a guide to help them out. They didn't want to be like those foolish people that you always hear on the news stating that someone has been out for 4 days found severely dehydrated because they were in a place they know they shouldn't have been by themselves. So in this case, they hired someone, a guy by the name of Charlie Fultz, if I'm not mistaken, or Charles Rack, that's his name specifically. He's the one that became their guide. He decided to help them throughout that area. So yes, this is the gentleman that decided, that was going to teach them, I guess, the ways of the wilderness, and at the same time make sure that they don't get foolishly lost. So this all started, again, August 20th, 1976. They started their camping tour there. It was on the second night. Some of this, though, information seems to be disputed, because it seems like some of this information, it's either the second or third night, or in other situations it's either this location or a location close to it. I guess just through the myriad of time, these things just have varied just a little bit, but overall still the story still stays somewhat the same. But in any case, if we go by this notion, it was around the second night that they noticed something weird happening in the sky. In this case, they described it as a weird light of some kind that looked like it was in the far distance. They just immediately, though, assumed that it was just your average aircraft, which makes sense. I mean, when you see something at night, something blinking in the far distance, most people are not going to be thinking automatically it's a UFO. Instead, it would just be an aircraft. There was one interesting trait, though, about this thing, and it was the fact that this light, it looked like, even from a distance, that it caved in on itself and then it vanished. So that's how it ultimately went away. That was particularly interesting, because normally you don't kind of see that stuff. If it was truly an aircraft, you would see it just go off parallel to the horizon, and then that's it. It's gone at a certain point, at a certain distance. But no, in this case, this light caved in on itself and then just outright vanished. And then cut to a few days later, either on the third or the fifth night. Again, this is where things get a little confusing in terms of the timeline. That's when they noticed another thing happening. They decided to go at night this time to go fishing. Those of you that are fans of fishing no doubt can herald how much better it is to go fishing at night rather than during the day. And so they went to a place, either Smith Pond or Eagle Lake. Again, a little bit disputed into which location they were at, but located still close to there in Allagash, Maine. And so there they were out in the nighttime enjoying their fishing, all four of them, all in the canoe that they had out there in the middle of the lake. It was only though a few minutes, well actually scratch that, before they went out into the lake, they decided to do something very smart, and that was the sense that they wanted to build a large fire to make certain that they could keep track of their coordinates. What better way in the middle of the darkness of the night to know where your point of origin was than if you built a large fire? That way, no matter how far away you were, you can always look back and see the orange glow of the fire somewhere in the distance and know that's where I was originally. So they did that to make sure that they don't get, again, even with the guide, hopelessly lost later on. Then they went out into the canoe and then straight into the lake itself. But it was only a few minutes of doing that, and that's when they noticed another light, similar to the one that they saw a couple of days back, this time appearing within the sky. It seems like at that point the light was kind of minding its own business, if you could believe that. Like, it wasn't, the way I was reading the information, this UFO encounter, whatever the UFO was, it wasn't out to necessarily get to them, at least up front, but then them being human beings, they decided curiosity was the better of them. One of them either flashed a light directly towards that UFO, towards that light itself, the one that was in the sky, or according to something else I read, they used the light to flash an SOS. Maybe they just wanted to see if this was truly, let's say, your average aircraft, if it would communicate back. You know, somebody just riding along in the aircraft, kind of like when people flash the horn sign whenever an 18-wheeler passes by. That's the idea that I got from these guys. Like, they just wanted to see if there would be a reaction from whoever human was within that normal-looking aircraft. Of course, they're not assuming at this point that it was a UFO. The minute they did that, though, either A, they shone the light directly at it, or B, did the SOS sign, that's when things took a crazy turn. All of a sudden, this light literally turned and went straight towards them. Wow, can you imagine that feeling at that point? I mean, to see something in the distance, and then the minute you do something to attract its attention, there it is, not barreling towards them, but still coming closer and closer. Clearly, they started freaking out, especially when they started seeing that this was not your average aircraft. In fact, the way they described it was the usual hallmarks of this thing was the UFO. It had the classic traits of a UFO. It had about what they estimated was 80 feet in total diameter. It just basically looked like your average UFO. And then finally, when it came close enough to them, that's when it came across the top of the trees by the lake, went alongside the bank, and then it was right upon them. And that's when it shone a light straight down towards them. So it absolutely knew that it was going to be, that it knew where they were. It found them, and now it had a light straight upon them. By the way, this thing, whatever it was, another interesting trait about it was that it was changing colors. So the closer it got, they could see that it was changing from red to green and then whitish yellow. Clearly, though, at this point, these four guys were freaking out. Like, they decided to try to go as quickly as they could back into their point of origin by that campfire. But an interesting thing happened as they were rowing madly as can be straight towards that bank. Then it seems like a cut, like an instant cut, almost like, let's say you're watching a movie and then it cuts immediately to a different time. That's what happened to them. There they were rowing as quickly as can be, and then suddenly, millisecond later, there they are standing on the bank. And interestingly enough, that fire that was roaring previously now was just nothing but ashes, smoldering ashes, the remnants of, let's say, a fire that had gone out hours or so back. They were clearly confused as to what had occurred, had no idea what was happening, because one minute they were on the boat, on the canoe in the middle of the lake, rowing as fast as can be, and then now they're here standing in next to the fire that was purportedly out for several hours. They looked at each other, shocked, but realized realizing that nothing really seemed wrong. Like, they weren't hurt physically, they didn't seem to be hurt mentally either. So they just decided right then and there, with very little said, that they were going to get their gear and then get back onto their lives. They would get back to wherever they came from and then probably never mention this experience again. You would think that that would be enough, like that would be the end of this Allagash incident. But here's what occurred. One of the men had actually it was not a common occurrence, but it was something that you read about every single day, a car accident. That was Jim Weiner. He was in a car accident, and it left him with some form of seizures that he was suffering from. This, though, was the trigger that led him to believe that whatever happened on that night just wasn't something normal. Like, it wasn't just all of a sudden that they were on the canoe and then towards the bank. No, now he was getting an idea of what had happened between that missing time, because all of them beforehand were realizing, something was missing. They were out for several hours, but none of them could explain that lost time, so they just left it as is. But now with these seizures, whatever these seizures were doing, they were triggering these repressed memories within this guy Jim, so much so that he was eventually telling his doctor when he had these seizures, he was seeing visions of these quote-unquote gray men, like your classic gray aliens. They had these metallic lidless eyes, they had these very long necks, four-fingered hands, and then the classic oval-shaped heads when it came to, let's say, your average gray alien. Not only that, but his visions saw him on some kind of operating table of some kind towards the edge of some room, a metallic looking room, just looked like your average, let's say, what would later be described as a doctor's room. And then whatever these things were, these grays, there they were peering over him as they were examining something on him. Clearly, though, like, he was freaking out because he also saw in his visions his friends within the same room also experiencing this same situation. So he shared it with an investigator, and then that investigator suggested that the rest of the men, who I can't quite tell if they were experiencing these visions either at that point, like, let's say if things started just coming back to them, or if it was only just Jim that had it happen because of his seizures. Either way, though, this investigator expressed the idea for them to go under hypnosis to make certain that they all could recall truly what happened during that lost time period. And they did. They agreed to it. And lo and behold, once they did so, all four of them started to describe what happened that night. There's not really much detail that I could find other than and I keep saying that word classic, but it's the standard case when it comes to these UFO abductions. And you're looking at some of those drawings already from their experience. They stated that once that light was shown on them, then whatever it was that was within the UFO brought them inside that area. And then the way they described it inside the UFO, it was like something involving like your average, they described it as a vet's office, but I imagine it'd be closer to like a doctor's office. Silvery tables here and there, silvery sitting places, also just lots of metallic looking stuff. And then they each in turn were examined by the aliens one by one. Some of them had some skin taken from them, others had fluid taken from them as well. You can only imagine what kind of fluid that was, all that entails. And then others, one of them described a strange situation too. Whatever it was that these aliens were doing, they did something where every time one of the, like, let's say one of the guys tried to focus on the face of one of those actual aliens, there was something that the aliens were doing to make sure that when that happened, it just became more blurrier, if that makes sense. It's almost like there was a purposeful program or something that was involved in their vision, where they could see perfectly fine throughout the rest of the ship, but anytime they focused their eyes on the alien, this programming kicked in and then that way they could not see the alien itself. It was almost a fuzzier image the more they tried to focus. I found that pretty interesting. It reminded me of the Marvel 2099 comic books. There's part of the programming there involving the video cameras where certain images are automatically focused out. So that's what it made me think of whenever I first read this information. But yes, after this examinations or whatever was the case, that's when the aliens dropped them back off. They even stated that they saw the light one more time, the very same light that brought them up. In this case, there was again with the UFO hovering above them, and then the light slowly went away as the UFO itself also went away. That was it. That was the last they saw of it. By the way, these men also went under several examinations. They went under examinations to prove they were mentally stable. They also took a lie detector test. They passed all of them as well. And I believe they did more hypnotic sessions and did also profiling from investigators to try to make sure that they could all make the claim that yes, they're stating what they're stating was of sound mind, like they're telling the truth, in other words, and they all seem to pass all that information. There is just one, it appears to be, I guess, motive that some people have stated with regards to this Allagash encounter. It's the fact that these drawings that you're looking at, I believe all of them or some of them are still being sold by, sorry, that was my cat, are still being sold by the artists themselves. So some people have stated that this is more of a motive to try to gain profit, like from the incident. So whether that was true, whether that's not true, that's up to you to decide. But at least that's another standpoint that people have taken with regards to this Allagash encounter. But that's it. That's all the info really tied to it. Nothing else really happened to them afterward. I didn't read any more like you've heard from others alien abductees where they get visited multiple times by other aliens throughout the years. Didn't seem like it happened in this case, but if anyone has any more info, any other current info, that'd be really great to hear. I believe that they go on the UFO circuit as well, although this was again about 40 years ago, so I'm not quite certain what their updated info is. But if anyone has that, that'd be really great to hear too. So alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.